Hi everyone! JesterBell is here, and today I am doing a video that I was supposed to do last year and that even won a poll last year for me to do. But I didn't do it, and I announced why. Why? Because I was so nervous about doing this video and being able to cover it correctly. But this is just too important a topic to pass up, and it's too relevant, especially now as the industry of movies is going through a major change. As you can see from the title of this video, this might be a little bit more provocative, but you know what you signed up for if you clicked the video. Now, for the last 10 years now, wow, 10 years of time, or if not even longer, probably the biggest topic of all when it comes to movies and whatnot is politics, and how politics have been affecting movies and TV shows, with one side saying that politics is what is destroying movies and TV, aka woke, and the other side saying that politics has always been a part of movies. And this sort of back and forth has really come to a head, but still to this day, with movies like Captain America: Brave New World that was allegedly severely reworked because of the political messaging behind the scenes, and that made Disney executives very nervous. How much studios like Disney, for example, are now delaying films, like Snow White was another example, and reworking them to not be so incisive, and of course the incisive backlash that came to these films and projects in the first place that made studios want to rework them in the first place. You know, there's just a lot of it, and then there's a lot of talk about now are we going to enter a time when things are more apolitical or more conservative and all those things, and it just brings me back to the question, is politics really the problem with movies? Because I have a channel that believes that we are in a horrible era for movies, and that a lot of people, even including Quentin Tarantino, for example, agree. But is politics the problem with that? Is that the inherent reason why we've been seeing so much bad writing, so much bad quality? Like, people blame politics for why Star Wars has failed, and why Marvel has failed, and why all of these major franchises have failed. And is it actually the reason? Is it actually the reason why things are so badly written and why the industry is in such a bad state? And did we really live in a utopia era, something of 15 years ago, when movies were not so politicized? Well, let's explore that now. Let's explore the real reasons. Like, is politics really the problem with movies? Does it inherently disrupt films? Should movies just strive to be escapism and be apolitical entirely? Well, let's explore. First of all, let's debunk a few things. Have politics always been a part of films? Yes. And they always will be. And I'm not talking about even just the way that a writer or director's personal beliefs are always going to inherently affect a project, whether they intend for it or not. No, I mean politics. Overt politics of the time have always been a part of movies. In the late 60s, you got a lot of movies like Day the Earth Stood Still and Planet of the Apes that were very, very much anti-war, pro-peacetime.
We live in peace, without arms or armies, secure in the knowledge that we are free from aggression and war, free to pursue more profitable enterprises. It is no concern of ours how you run your own planet. But if you threaten to extend your violence, this earth of yours will be reduced to a burned-out cinder.
You know, there's just a lot of that messaging, and I don't know. Was there a certain event, like, say, a war that happened overseas that might encourage all of these convenient anti-war, pro-peacetime movies? You gotta wonder. There was also a ton of projects, once again, like Planet of the Apes, or even episodes of Star Trek, and just a lot of movies that involved discussions and allegories on race. Now, could that have had anything to do with coming out of the civil rights movement?
Violence prolongs hate, hate prolongs violence. By what right are you spilling blood?
By the slaves' right.
Caesar, I, a descendant of slaves, am asking you to show humanity.
It definitely did. Planet of the Apes, once again, has a lot of strong allegories about race and classism in there. Very overt. Star Trek, the original series, had an episode dedicated towards race and how ridiculous racism was. That's one where the two societies are warring because one has black and white on one side of the face and the other has black and white on the other side of the face, and that's to make fun of how ridiculous racism was.
It is obvious to the most simple-minded that Loki is of an inferior breed. The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
You blind, Commander Spock? Well, look at me. Look at me.
You're black on one side and white on the other.
I am black on the right side.
I fail to see the significant difference.
Loki is white on the right side. All of his people are white on the right side.
And by the way, Day of the Earth stood still, very successful movie. Planet of the Apes was considered the most successful franchise at the time before Star Wars even came out. The overt politics in these movies was not damaging the box office at all. Meanwhile, let's go over to Disney, and this is one that I really want to hammer home because I've seen this ridiculous meme out there that says Disney was doing diversity better when it wasn't trying, using things like Lilo and Stitch as an example, or Princess and the Frog. I'm sorry. You think that Disney wasn't trying when it introduced diversity into those movies? Do you think that when we hit the 90s, it was just very convenient and totally organic that Disney started doing movies that represented different cultures and beliefs and myths and all of that?
Hakuna Matata. What a wonderful phrase.
No, this was definitely intentional by Disney. Also, the way that female characters were portrayed by Disney changed. It was very notable during the 90s with the Disney Renaissance that Disney princesses started to have to want something more than love because that was a reflection of the more feminist beliefs of the time and how they were changing over the years. Disney definitely focus grouped these movies to death. But guess what? Disney Renaissance, one of the most, if not the most important era of Disney history, the most successful era of Disney history, where they were churning out hit after hit after hit. Everyone grew up with movies from the Disney Renaissance. Everyone loves those movies. Apparently, Disney pushing diversity in those movies at the time was not controversial. And once again, they were very intentional about that. Now, some people have claimed that the difference between these successful things then versus now is the overt nature of politics. Like, was it telling you what to think? It wasn't telling you what to think. It let you make up your own mind. I disagree with that because I've read and watched a lot of media, and there were definitely a lot of times when it was very clear exactly what the writer wanted me to think and exactly what the writer's beliefs were and what they demanded that their audience believe. But there is still a lot of those projects, like I've read in comics, that were still very enjoyable. I mean, guys, if we're talking comics, in the 80s, the biggest, most popular series was X-Men. And contrary to popular belief, they were not subtle at all about what they stood for. It was very, very on-the-nose, overt allegory for racism and discrimination. And by the way, as X-Men moved to try to be more of an allegory for gay rights, starting in the 90s, but becoming more overt about that in the 2000s.
Heck? Didn't ask, so I didn't tell.
They were still churning out successful projects, even though that was more of a tense discussion. And that's another thing. People might say that the difference between now and then is that political tensions have flared up a lot more. And that's why people are upset when they see it in movies. But do you think that the Vietnam War was not controversial and that there weren't very passionate opinions on that? But these projects were still very, very successful. Because here's the thing, people can still enjoy things that they might not necessarily agree with because it's entertaining. Here's my entire thing. Like, entertainment is very, very enticing to be entertained. It's like candy. It's like sugar. You want more of it. And that is why people tend to be able to enjoy things even if they might vehemently disagree with the politics or the beliefs of that thing. Atheists can enjoy Lord of the Rings, even though J.R.R. Tolkien was a devout Catholic man, and his works were very much inspired by his faith. C.S. Lewis, very, very strong Christian allegory, still enjoyed by non-Christians. Star Trek, a show made by an atheist, though still very popular among Christians. Like, people from different beliefs can still enjoy the works of others because, first of all, entertainment is very enticing. It's hard to let go of it. But also, this is another thing, that when you are a good writer, even if you have a certain belief that you definitely want to push on people, when you're a good writer, the entire point of a good story is that you break down all the walls and you don't feel like you're reading a story or watching it. You just feel like you're experiencing something. And that might be why well-written material and well-presented entertaining material doesn't necessarily feel like you're being preached at, because it just feels like you're watching another life play out or something, and it feels like you're still allowed to form your own assessment about it. That is one difference. That's what I want to talk about now. Like, what is the change? Like, if people were totally accepting towards politics and shows, even for very tense subjects in the past, then what is the difference now? Well, people would say that the difference is in writing. Like, Disney Renaissance movies, Day the Earth Should Still, Planet of the Apes, X-Men, all were overall very well written and entertaining, and honestly, that is why they were so successful back then. It didn't matter that they had politics that they were pushing, because that really doesn't matter at all. What matters is the skilled people working on it. Disney Renaissance had the top-notch writers, songwriters, animators working on the entire thing, just churning out great movie after great movie, and that is why the Disney Renaissance was so successful. They were great writers and great people who knew how to make shows work. They knew how to weave the diversity and the themes of those movies into a story and make it very entertaining. Now what we see with a lot of films is that the politics has been done a lot worse. For example, there's a difference between a movie like Thelma and Louise that came out in 1990 that is a feminist tale about two women who've come from abusive relationships who gradually fall into a life of crime after a giant misunderstanding. And the movie has you ask a lot of questions about, you know, what was the circumstance something that could have been changed? Like, what were the decisions that could have been made, or was this just fated to all happen?
Us would have ever pulled a stunt like this, but if you was ever to meet my husband, you'd understand why.
But there's a difference between a well-written, well-acted movie like Thelma and Louise that's feminist and this.
Hashtag feminism. Hashtag feminism. Hashtag feminism.
Yeah, there's a difference between a thoughtful feminist film and this.
Here's the thing, Bruce. I'm great at controlling my anger. I do it all the time. When I'm catcalled in the street, when incompetent men explain my own area of expertise to me, pretty much every day, because if I don't, I will get called emotional, or I might just literally get murdered. So I'm an expert at controlling my anger because I do it infinitely more than you.
Yeah, the problem with a show like, for example, It's Gonna Hate like She-Hulk is you've got a character who is a narcissist, and she's talking down to a guy who in the comics has abusive trauma manifests itself into a rage monster who has to live every single day trying to suppress a rage monster, yet she says that she knows how to deal with rage better than him because she deals with catcalling and men explaining her job to her at the workplace. This is just an embarrassing work. Or, since we're on the topic of superheroes, you got Falcon and Winter Soldier.
You've got to do better, Senator.
I think that this is a horrible show in its exploration of racism. I want to use an example here. For example, there are multiple episodes of sitcom shows from the 90s that explore the topic of racist cops. There's this episode from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air where the two leads get pulled over and put into jail, and it becomes a big discussion of, were they put in jail just because they were black?
Those cops were just trying to do their job. Well, don't get all bent out of shape. Man, you ain't learned nothing this weekend, did you?
If we would have had a map, we wouldn't have had to drive 2 miles an hour trying to find a freeway entrance, and we wouldn't have been stopped.
Oh, okay, I get it now. We were stopped because we were driving too slow. We were breaking the slowness limit. Oh, okay. Well, you see, I never heard of that law before, but I did hear this other law. It's called the if you see a black guy driving anything but a burnt-out Pinto, you better stop him because he stole it law.
And it really makes you think about it. And the reason why it works is it's very realistic, and the conversation around it is very realistic, and it makes the audience ask questions about it.
Dad, if you were a policeman and you saw a car driving 2 miles an hour, wouldn't you stop it?
I asked myself that question the first time I was stopped. Good night, sir.
I would stop it.
But let's look at the way that Falcon and Winter Soldier portrays racism. You've got Sam Wilson, and he is a character who should, by all means, be a celebrity in his universe. He was an Avenger. He saved the world. Yet, for some reason, in Falcon and Winter Soldier, he's portrayed as somebody in these situations like he can't get a loan for his family's boat. There's a scene in the movie where he's in a black neighborhood and he's having a mild disagreement with Bucky, and all of a sudden a cop pulls up and has to break it up because he assumes that Sam Wilson is attacking Bucky. And it doesn't work in this context. First of all, because it just kind of comes out of nowhere in the scene. We have the revelation about Isaiah Bradley being a black Captain America who was hidden and experimented on all these years, and then we immediately jump to two men having a mild disagreement, and then a cop just shows up out of nowhere to break it up, going after Sam Wilson, and it just was so stacked onto each other and out of nowhere. It didn't feel like a realistic narrative. It felt like Disney was trying to check as many boxes for how many issues it could bring up in this show. But another reason why this doesn't really work, because of the context of the show. Sam Wilson should be a celebrity. People should recognize him. Like, Dave Chappelle has talked about racism. He's joked about his experiences, but he's also acknowledged he's Dave Chappelle. He's gotten away with a lot. What we have here is two different shows that have dealt with the same thing, racist cops, but one does it really well in a realistic scenario, and one almost makes it out comical with how it just comes up in the show like that. And later on in the final episode, the show gets worse. You have Sam Wilson defending terrorists because he says we need to listen and do better. We have him acknowledging that he doesn't understand a complex situation, but saying that that's good. Falcon and Winter Soldier has a high schooler's understanding of these complex political situations. It comes off as childish and embarrassing, and many characters are changed from the way they were in the past just to facilitate this new narrative, and that's why it's bad. It's not that you can't do stories exploring racism and come from a perspective and try to convince your audience of it, or that your show can't be still entertaining because of that. It's how you portray it. Same with the feminist narratives that these things have been going for. And this is what's very important, is that when you portray a perspective badly, a political perspective, you end up damaging your cause. Like Amelia Perez, I hope that we finally were able to find some common ground with that movie. The movie is supposed to be pro-trans and pro-Mexico, but wound up being offensive to Mexicans and did not portray trans people in a very positive light. And it's a laughable film on every level. I watched it, and everyone is making fun of it. And you see, that is what happens when you try to go forth and portray a certain perspective, a certain political perspective or belief, and you do it badly. You end up bringing ridicule to your point. I hope that there's common ground with that, because the problem with a lot of this criticism back and forth about politics is that the people who are doing these shows are very, very defensive. Like, you see that with Amelia Perez. I've been seeing it ever since Patient Zero of all of this has happened, comics, where you can criticize the show for the way you portray the politics or the themes, but then that instantly becomes from the writers and directors as an attack on them. Like, you must only be attacking them because you disagree with their belief, and therefore you are the bad person that shouldn't be acknowledged. And that gets you in a bubble where you never improve and you never make your point better. You are only actually making your point look worse. And once again, we've seen this across a lot of shows. And it brings up the question, well, what's different? Why has the writing for these themes that have been done in writing since forever, why has it suddenly gotten worse? Clearly, the writers and the people behind the scenes doing them just aren't as good. That's part of it, but how would we possibly get so many bad writers in Hollywood making this stuff? Well, I think that there is a big reason behind that, and I think that it is very obvious. And I think that it is impossible to do this video without bringing it up. But what we do know behind the scenes is that factually, a lot of times what has changed in Hollywood is, it's one thing to try to push diversity in your films, push certain themes in your films with people who are very experienced with writing and art and all of that, and those will probably turn out good. But it's another thing if your desire to push a certain belief system or politics starts to affect your hiring practices behind the scenes. I'm just saying, it's happened a whole lot, and we see this publicly. We see these certain policies publicly that Disney has been hiring people either because of their identity, because of their background, or in a lot of cases, they've been hiring activists to work on these shows, and that's a big difference here. The difference of hiring artists versus hiring activists who are trying to be artists. Like a lot of people who are working on behind the scenes, like Victoria Alonso, for example, who was working at Marvel and she recently got fired, which I can only imagine why. These were people who were very, very strongly promoting activism behind the scenes. Jennifer Lee, who was working at Disney, was hired post-Me Too, in a post-Me Too landscape where they were really trying to promote female creators after a sort of apology for Me Too, I guess. And Jennifer Lee was really, really into activism and apparently hiring other activists to work alongside with her. Apparently, from what rumors have said, getting rid of the original animators who worked at Disney. What would this do? Well, this would bring about a lot of people who do not have the experience to work on these projects, and that's why not only the writing has suffered, but the animation as well, because the people do not have the experience. I mean, it's kind of hard not to see it when you've been paying attention to Hollywood or not. For example, Cathy Yan. Cathy Yan was the person hired to direct Birds of Prey, and I didn't understand why she was hired at first, because at the time, she only had one credit to her name. She had only ever done one short film as a director, hadn't even gotten wide distribution, and before that, she was a journalist. She didn't have any prior experience in the industry. And if you read interviews with Cathy Yan about Birds of Prey, she talks about how she was completely over her head with this movie. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't understand how the industry worked. They even had to bring in Chad Stileski to come in and help her do the action scenes because the action scenes weren't enough. And Cathy Yan has really been left out to dry. I haven't seen her do anything after Birds of Prey after this was advertised as her big break. And why is that? Well, I'm wondering, did the people behind the scenes, like Margot Robbie, who was actually the mastermind behind the movie, did they just want a shiny new headline about the identity of the person that they hired to do this movie? This has happened a whole lot. Like, this is what's happened with Marvel a whole lot lately for the Marvels or Captain America Brave New World, where they will cast a director versus actually hiring somebody. So they'll cast somebody who sounds great for the role for a headline, but then the movie will not actually be the vision of that director. Like Nia DaCosta, she is a person who does have experience in the industry. She did Candyman. But when she got on set, she said that it wasn't her doing it. She would show up on set day to day and she wouldn't know what anyone was doing. It was really just, she was just cast there for the producers to then take over and do their work. And that is what's happened with a lot of Marvel movies lately. Like, they aren't a vision of a director. Directors are just cast in there for the look of it, and then the producers make the movie. And guess what? This has not actually led to the advancement of a lot of careers. These people are being screwed over by this kind of performative stuff. But I would say that that is a very plausible reason for why writing has gotten worse in Hollywood when it comes to the political side. Things have become very, very politicized in real life, and these companies are trying to follow suit and have their projects reflect that, but it's also led them to the point where they can't have the right people working on it anymore because there's a lot of this posturing of hiring practices, and I want to emphasize it doesn't actually help the careers of the people that they hire, at least in the times that I've seen it. Now that Disney is changing from a lot of that stuff, you can also see it still there. Like, that's how you get people who are more concerned of Disney turning away from their activism than the shows at hand, because these are people that Disney likely hired because they were activists. And here's the problem with activists. It doesn't matter really where you come from or what your beliefs are. Activists tend not to make good shows. There's the difference between if you're an artist who happens to have certain beliefs or versus if you're an activist trying to be an artist. This is why a lot of religious films don't do well, because they're made by pastors and whatnot who have a sermon they want to preach, but they don't actually know filmmaking. They don't actually know writing. And this is why these projects don't actually work out. I would say the same thing has been happening at a lot of these companies. They hire people because they want the company to look good, and they hire activists in these roles, but then those people don't know what they're doing a lot of the times, and so the stuff really suffers. So in that sense, politics has been a big problem in movies and shows. However, I would like to push back on it just a little bit, because while I agree that this is a problem, I don't think it's the only problem. Remember what I was saying about how Disney would cast directors in these roles because it looks good, but then not actually let the directors do their own vision with the film. This is another problem that I think has happened with Hollywood, is that it's become much and much less about the creators themselves and more about these studio suits making movies that suit them. What I've heard a lot from people critiquing Hollywood and people who have worked there is that Hollywood is run by a bunch of business suits who don't actually know art. They don't actually know films. They try to sell things like they're selling toothpaste or hamburgers. They don't actually know what makes a film good. And that's why I think we've seen a lot of the creativity sap from projects. The rush for streaming has been a major problem in changing things from being like cinema to just being more content. And the amount of content churned out for these streaming services kind of self-cannibalize themselves. That is another huge reason. And some of these things just collide, like the IP, like everything in Hollywood. They have moved entirely to try to milk the big IPs and get as much money from them as possible, because those were the big money makers and that's all they want to make anymore. But what happens when you hire a bunch of new activists who don't know these properties and don't see them as anything other than something that needs to be changed, when these are things that are made because they have very passionate built-in fan bases? Well, you have these activists trying to change the things that came before and misunderstand what made them work, and that ends up getting rid of the entire fan base. But that has also led to a lot of co-opting, intentional co-opting of people coming in who aren't allowed to make their own projects, and so they're just co-opting these franchises. It's all interconnected to why we have so much bad quality right now. It isn't necessarily just because they're hiring activists or people based on their identities and not the right people for the job. There's an interconnected web of things that have become of the industry: the over-reliance on IPs, the rush to streaming, the suits who don't know what a movie is supposed to be, the move away from creativity, all of that, and the hiring of these people, which has led to all these bad productions. And because the productions are bad, all these people collectively don't know how to write or aren't focusing on the creators themselves and in a balance between the business side and the creative side, their productions are worse, and therefore the politics in them comes off worse than ever. Perhaps we only blame the politics at the forefront because time and time again, when people have criticized these shows and movies, they get blamed by the people behind the scenes for being, you know, bigots, alt-right phobes, everything. Trust me, if you try to criticize something like The Acolyte or comics or anything, then it is instantly assumed that it must be because you are against the overall message of it, and therefore you're a bad person who shouldn't be listened to. And I think that also is just another reflection of the people behind the scenes that they've hired to work on these projects, and how these people, their activism always comes first because they've hired a lot of activists. But as a final point on all of this, while I don't think that politics is the sole problem with everything going on with movies, I do think that it is a symptom of the core cause of why there isn't a lot of consistent success from movies, why a lot of people have been pushed away. Because if you look at the past and if you look at the politics of the past, whether everyone agreed at the time, and no one ever agrees on everything, they were all very relevant to the time. Lots of anti-war peacetime movies because of the Vietnam War. Lots of discussions of race because of the civil rights movement and how that was happening. These have always been reflections of the time. But I've got to wonder, are these movies and things that they created because they thought that they were going to be really progressive actually reflections of the time? Like, you see the pushback of a movie like Snow White, for example, and how people were really reacted badly to Rachel Zegler's words where she was very disparaging towards true love. And that was just sort of a buildup of a lot of things where people weren't actually offended that the movie was going to have dwarves in it, like they tried to change. The movie also was originally going to change the fact that the evil queen was jealous of Snow White's beauty, because all of these things were apparently taboo subjects. Or were they? Because in my opinion, these sorts of beliefs and these sorts of things we've been seeing a lot of only actually represent a very small portion of people. Like, I've been doing a lot of videos on the uglified video game characters, and I think the whole thing is most people don't want female characters to look that way. It's just a small minority who makes it sound that way. It's a small minority who's been going off and saying that for a female character to have a love interest takes away her agency. I was hearing a lot of that from like websites and people on Twitter and stuff like that, during maybe the 2010s, and just a lot of arguments that I thought were ridiculous. But I think these people got into the ear of executives and people in Hollywood, and they started to believe that this was legitimately the way that the culture was headed, and that they had to create movies that reflected that, because these studio suits definitely don't believe in the things that they're preaching. They're moving away wholesale now that they have proof that this might not actually be what the majority of the population wants to see, or the majority of the way people are thinking. All that these suits at the top really want is money.
We've got to have money.
But now they're in sort of a scramble where they're delaying projects and trying to redo them so that they don't have the political beliefs that they used to. But the fact that they went so far into this and it took them this long to realize that people weren't actually asking for this just says a lot to me about how out of touch they are. And that's what I think is the actual main core problem of Hollywood, if we were really just to sum it up to one thing. They're completely out of touch with the mainstream. They don't understand what people are really feeling right now or thinking right now. They don't understand what people actually want to see. In that way, all of this hiring of activists and pushing these beliefs in shows and being very overt about it, changing franchises, like the whole reason they changed Star Wars is they thought that they were going to get a brand new audience with this stuff. All of this seems to be chasing a brand new young audience, but they aren't connecting with any young audiences because no one was actually asking for this. And now it's almost like it's 5 years too late and they're just now trying to change. It just shows how out of touch these people are with the average person. If they're just now acknowledging after all these years of screaming about politics what the problem might actually be. But unfortunately, the problem at the core of everything is just how out of touch these CEOs are and how they can't create something that people want to actually watch. And what's also been a big problem with all of this hiring practices behind the scenes is they're still left in a time now where where's the new talent? Where are the new directors with a vision and experience to be able to handle these movies? Like, I just watched Winter Soldier and The First Avenger, compared it to Captain America Brave New World, and I was blown away not just by the writing, but just how professional the shot looks versus Captain America Brave New World with such inexperienced director behind the camera. It's taken them so many years where they haven't been hiring the right people to foster up in these roles that now who are they going to get right away? Who are they going to have to take that long to mentor people to get to that point where they could make great stuff again in the industry? It's going to take a long time to shift out all of the activists and the people that are working in the industry right now and actually get some people with experience there. It's going to take the industry a long time to change. And I guess that's a you made your bed and lie in it moment, because a lot of people were saying this for years and they just did not listen. So that is the answer to, was politics really the problem with movies all along? The answer is yes and no. And I hope that we were able to have a more complicated discussion about it. So going forward, as places like Disney posture about how they're going to be about entertainment now and not about politics, I want people to keep in mind that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get a lot of quality entertainment all of a sudden, because politics was not necessarily the only problem behind the scenes. It doesn't matter what political message you're trying to push. What matters is if you do it well, but the real problem is getting some actual talent and allowing those creators to actually work with you on the plot rather than just casting them while the producers and executives do everything. How long is it going to take before, if ever, we get some actual good creators and directors behind the scenes to actually give us new stories and bring them to life after all of this? That's all I got for you guys today. I hope you guys understand what I'm saying and why I might have been a little bit nervous to talk about all this, but I think it is important to talk about going forward in the new supposedly apolitical time. And I disagree with people that we're entering in a new Hays Code. No, the old time where we couldn't even have female characters have love interests because that was offensive, that was a Hays Code. Now we might be able to open things up again, but only if there is a true understanding that it's not politics themselves so much as writing and being in touch with your audience. Once again, all I got for you guys today. If you want to support my work, which I do all by myself on here, please consider donating to my Patreon, as these wonderful people have. I am a filmmaker myself and I want to be a good filmmaker. So if you want to support that, please check out my playlist of short films as I'm practicing with them. And I will see you guys all next time.